Check this out news. We connect the streets.
Kind of dive into this. You know how we do it. Check this out news. We connect the streets. And so today, we have Brigadier General Arnold Gordon-Bray with us. I'm very proud to have you. Thanks first and foremost for being on the show today.
Glad to be here, man. Thank you. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. And as you know, June is Black Music Month, a holiday that was put in place, or uh, an acknowledgement that was put in place way back when in 1979 with Jimmy Carter, kind of giving tribute to Black music and their contributions to society, American society. Here at Tech This Out, we want to expand on two different things. Look at Black music and tech and its impact on the military. And we've known that hip hop is kind of the symbol head of today's culture, right? And so that culture was created many moons ago, well before even a Run DMC, just the culture of things. But I wanted to take this time to talk with you, get to know you. One, I got to say salute to you for the time that you've served in the military. I do know that you are a retired brigade general. Why don't we start in with that? How long were you in the military? What brought you into the military to begin with?
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny. I kind of envision myself in the world that we're in today, but the reality is, my brother was very smart. I wasn't as smart as he was. He used to get these advertisements from the academies,
Hmm.
and I thought the uniform was cool because people forget that during the mid '60s, late '60s, we the Black community really enjoyed seeing our folks in uniform. So I like that too. And of course, so I envisioned myself, I wasn't even thinking college at the time. I was
Hmm.
thinking, putting the uniform on and serving, because a lot of the folks that were like us did. We sometimes forget that that's what really changed. That was a big wave of us as a result of World War II. It gave us some great opportunities. So me, I never envisioned being a general. I mean, I really didn't. That was not it. But I did want to be a soldier. I mean, I watched combat and all these shows, and like the kids
Right,
now play Call of Duty and everything else.
right,
I played that in the woods. I went in the creeks and rode around. I did all those things, and
right.
so I wanted to be that guy. And truthfully, I was in for 35 years. I joined initially to be an infantryman, and I-
Mm.
and that's all I was going to do. But then I got to jump out of airplanes, and I became a paratrooper. And then I got to dangle on ropes and become an air assault soldier. In
Where
fact, I
did
went.
you, where did you do your basic at?
My basic was actually done as a basic officer, was at Fort Riley, Kansas, and my basic officer infantry training was at Fort Benning, Georgia.
Okay,
And and I went through there several times because I ultimately went to Ranger School at Fort Benning, and Fort Benning's actually done in three Ranger School's done in four phases. It can have a desert phase, depending upon what year you went through, but it always has what they call the city phase at Fort Benning. It always has a mountain phase up in the mountains of Dahlonega, Georgia, and then it
right.
has a swamp phase down in Florida. Uh, and then you kind of do those three things. So I did that, but I found out, wow, it matched me. It matched me. The physicality, being in charge, doing the things, and then by the way, you matter, and that kept me in.
Mm.
Honestly, basically one step at a time. I just enjoyed myself, and then ultimately, I was I was promoted and kept getting promoted, and then ultimately became a brigadier general in our United States Army.
Mm. Mm. Now, what year you got into the military, and what year you went to college first, right?
I did. I went to college. I went to college in Central Missouri, which was in itself was a whole nother drama. I mean, not saying drama, a whole nother passage in life. I was an artist, by the way,
Okay.
and oh yeah, I was an artist, and Central Missouri offered me an art scholarship, and then because of that, that's the college that I kind of that's what took me off the pathway to join, as opposed to just going to college first. And then that's when the idea of putting the uniform on, as my professor of military science was standing there in his, I'm sitting in, I could envision myself being him. He was lieutenant colonel. I could envision myself being in that uniform. And ironically, that's what got me making that first step to look like him, to be like him, to wear that uniform, to be that guy that came back into the neighborhood from Vietnam, and of course the ones you read about from previous wars. I got to be that guy.
Wow, and that's a feeling right there.
Well,
That's a
there's a couple of things. Later on we're going to talk about this, but we as people of color have a warrior spirit. We've got a warrior spirit in us. You and I both pledged fraternities, and
right.
There's a challenge right now that tells us that, one, we have to be very careful now because some folks have taken it to some dangerous extremes. But the challenge of the fraternity, the challenge of pledging fraternities, we all asked for it. We asked for that challenge. So some of that was ingrained in me to want to be that warrior, and so that's just part of it.
Nice. So again, this being Black Music Month, we're titling this "Hip Hop's Invasion on the U.S. Military." When you came in to the military, we use hip hop as kind of a symbol head to all genres of Black music that have been used. But I find it very interesting to see, going back to the days of the likes of Muhammad Ali, and he used to bust. He wasn't busting 16 bars, but he was. He had some freestyles. He had some flows back then. But to see that, his story was one where he was recruited to go into the military. He denied that. You get in prison for that, and that kind of set tone to kind of the anti-establishment. It was, the culture. Well, before taking a knee, here he is taking a stance, right?
Well, absolutely. He was. See, he had just made a conversion to the Islam, the faith of Islam, and that was important to him. And the greater irony is that that is central. Our faith is central to being an American.
Yes.
And we get a chance to say he called himself a conscious objector, because how he understood his faith said, I can't do this. I can't be part of this. Now, he's a warrior, but he said, I can't do that. They offered him the opportunity to be just a symbol, but his faith says no. And the cool thing about music is music really is in everybody. Music is part of the rhythm of who we are. We're rhythmical people. We communicate by rhythm. And you can see soldiers, and we always have. You could see soldiers hanging out by the campfires back in the Revolutionary Civil War days, calling and singing cadences.
Right.
The folks in the military academy, they sing all the time. We run PT to motivate us and to keep us running for miles beyond the fatigue factor. We call cadence, and we used to call them Jody cadence, because guys that left home, and it was mostly guys at the time, they had left home. So we'd sing cadences about all the things that's happening while you're gone. Your girls gone, and we did it with that beat, with that pace. And we even used, in the 50s and 60s, we used Chuck Berry's music. Maybelline was a great cadence that we used to use in the military, and we sang those songs, and to motivate guys, we sing about both the making everybody feel comfortable that you just left your girl and somebody else is gonna take your girl, but that's all of us. We made jokes and talked about how folks are going to lose you lost your hair, you lost your blue jeans, and now you got to join the Army Green. And then there was also that competition between services. We told jokes, and again, all rhythm, because the steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, all that. Then we pick it up double time. So it's all that is the genre of life, and it's also if I may, real quickly,
Uh-huh.
There was a show that came out on Saturday Night Live. You've seen Black Jeopardy on Saturday Night Live?
Yeah, of course. Yep.
Okay, well, on Black Jeopardy, there's a place where you talk about play black jazz.
Mhm.
And then the guy says, "Well, oh no, it's the discussion on Google or the Android systems." And it says, "Play black jazz." He said, "I can play jazz because that's just all it is." So music, and more specifically in this case, uh, the rhythm of this nation, the rhythm of our people. And I say our people because it's both the flavors that come from the continent of Africa, the Caribbean, and those of us that are here. We sang when we worked in the fields
Right.
because music helps you forget where you are at the moment and be someplace else.
Right. How do you see Black music, particularly hip hop, under your watch, bringing cultures together in the military? Take that, let's say, the white boy from Texas to Iowa to Montana, and now you put him in there with the guy from Atlanta, Georgia, or Chicago, or LA. That's like culture clash. And what have you seen? You know, it's almost like even in football they may listen to heavy metal and you listen to gangster rap for that adrenaline rush, right? How do you see that in the military? Where what have you seen in terms of how hip hop, in particular, has kind of brought culture together?
Well, because remember, music is music, and it starts off being like a culture class, you know. But if you notice, like Run DMZ went and got with the one of the rock bands,
Yeah,
and they
Eros.
started,
Yeah,
walk this way,
yeah,
and because music becomes music, and guys start listening to it, and they
right,
start finding that beat. That's what, and that, by the way, that's what hip hop artists did better than anybody else. They started mixing, and they started taking just a few bars and started to put up. Well, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, they're doing the same thing because what happens is you meet a friend. One of
hmm,
my first friends was a guy named Leslie Abernathy from somewhere in Lubbock, Texas, and he and I hooked up, and we're sitting there, and he's singing his fight song from Texas A&M. It is still in my head today.
wow,
Texas A&M. You know, this is 1976,
wow,
and because that was him, he's singing it, and we're doing that, listening to music. Then I started noticing that there's a lot of commonality.
mm,
The country white guy is
yes,
like the urban black guy. You know, and there's
yeah.
everything else in between because it's clannish. You're close. You're really tight. You have your own flavor, your own rhythm, and
I've
you.
always said that there's a relationship between country music and hip hop. It might be
And
Jack Daniels or it could be cognac.
that's
Uh, this girl
it's
at
a
the
choice.
club, this girl at the club.
It's a choice. It's a choice you like. Back in the day, if you felt a guy from the white guy from the rural areas, he might like Pabst Blue Ribbon. The
Pabst
brother from
Blue.
the city was drinking Slits,
Right.
or Colt 45. You remember those days?
Yes. Oh.
you know, they were they would there was, but when you get together in the foxhole,
Right.
because let's face it, you're getting committed to having to fight with somebody, and so
Right.
you're sharing stuff. And by the way, some of the folks had never really been with folks that didn't look like them for the first time.
Right.
And so that culture blends over. You start to you and you can see it even
Mm,
in dress. You
mm,
can see it even in dress. You'll
yeah.
watch, for instance, you can watch the guy that had never put on a pair of khakis in his life, realize he's got to go to the colonel or the general's house. He puts on the blue blazer and the pair of khakis. You
Right.
watch the guy coming, and he sees the guy that's coming from especially in the early '80s, the baggy pants. He's wearing the baggy pants,
Mhm.
the oversized T-shirt, and then he's recognizing and he's making sure that it wasn't Jordans then, it was actually Adidas. He's got his Adidas and he makes sure they're clean. He's making sure they're clean, they're
Right.
spotless. But he doesn't tie them. He puts a little knot on the very edge so they can slip in like slippers.
Right. Oh my gosh. This is
But the guys are doing it. And by the way, you watch even the hats the guys to put on. When Ron puts on the Kango, the guys putting the Kangos on.
right.
And you said that's not it, but they're blending because they see something, and the person whose character
Hmm.
is sharing this, he passes it on.
Right.
That,
So
that's, that,
what has it been like where you started to see, you look at this culture that was once kind of rejected. Again, it was the anti-establishment, and then to see that it's being embraced in the military to the point of it's now being used as a tool of recruitment. It's
yes,
used in training. And then it's music on the battlefield, right? So it's kind of like, I may listen to the gangster rap just to for that adrenaline rush while on the battlefield, or in training, or obviously to your point, music also falls in line with emotions, right? And I'm sure in the military, there's many of emotions on any given day, especially during battle. So the culture, you could look at, if we look at some of the songs, I'm sure I'd love your take on people like from James Brown, and that might have been before your times, or the George Clinton, to even your take on looking at the likes of Lil Wayne, or we could all say the Jay-Z's, but I'd look at the Kanye West, and what is your take on looking at a couple of things. One, how powerful are we, the culture? And two, what have you thought of this, how the things have blended together, seeing, who would have ever thought of seeing a group of white soldiers, and where are they playing Drake? What are they playing? Jay-Z, Lil Wayne, Kanye. I'd love your feedback.
well, there's a lot of things you just blended because first of all, back in the early days, the military did a lot of things using the armed forces network, and for instance, in Vietnam, they had a guy called Kronauer who was one of the DJs, and he was being told to kind of do what they had done in World War II and
Mhm.
in Korean War, and broadcast soft, smooth music, big band, make them feel at home, but at the same
That's that music that we would see in those old John Wayne movies.
that's right. Make them
Big
get
band.
real clear views of good and bad. Don't get them too hyped. Keep the soldiers comfortable. Make them feel good. And the Bob Hopes in the world were probably the closest thing to bring humor, to bring things back, and make folks realize, or I hate to say, but we also recognize that most of the guys serving were guys, except principally nurses, and so everything was focused on keeping the guys feeling like guys. Well, then all of a sudden, Cronauer was bringing what they were listening to back home. If you listen to a lot of the AM stations, that's where most of the soul music has been played on.
Mhm.
He was bringing up songs and bringing up the Temptations and all of the Motown, that folks were staying away from the things that have become recognized as the era. So
So
now you've got
the Armed Force Network was kind of like
Armed Forces Network, AFN.
controlling it, right on, controlled kind of like the airwaves. There was almost kind of to some degree censorship then, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because there were those who believed that, one, you have to do those things. You don't want to get them too hype. And you mentioned earlier that they're listening to the Pandoras. They're listening to the uh, uh, their iPad, their Apple iTunes that they've selected and built their own bases for. Their their own uh, they're building their own systems of music, and they're sharing it. And so you talk about the Drakes of the world and those folks that they listen to. Well, Drake, by the way, looks like the blending of the world and America. And so he's bringing, or in this case, Canada. He's
Mhm.
bringing he's bringing that global sound that has been, that Toronto and the places from the continent of Africa and Europe. He's blending all that in, you know. And by the way, an ex-serviceman like Mystical, he gets a chance to go ahead and bring. In fact, he's got one. I think I saw it the other day. My daughter. So you know I don't listen to it too much, but
Right.
but my daughter brought it in. He's got one where he's talking about an Aston Martin, and it blending in what I like to listen to, which is that smooth music with lyrics, with rhythm and beat.
Right.
That's the world blended. That's happening literally every day.
Wow.
You know,
And so that when you talk about, again, it's the Armed Force Networks, right?
sure. Armed Forces Network. They call it
Armed
AFN.
Forces Network. Yeah, that's crazy. So that they control the airways. So that kind of leads me into, as we're talking about music, Black music in particular, and its role uh, on the military, then I'd sprinkle that with technology, right? And so you just got through saying, in one sense, here's how they've controlled the airwaves back in the day. Now, is it safe to say that a soldier of today is more connected than ever before?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Go back right now. You and I are talking in different parts of the world, and we're using Google in this case,
Yeah,
or
check
Zoom
this out. Yeah,
at this time. But we were actually streaming when I first went to Iraq in 2003, and I was talking to my family members back home over the airwaves and communicating to them. And many of them now we limit how much communications guys can give because everybody is not necessarily classified savvy, but
right.
they have the ability to talk, to communicate much more freely, and they get access to music. They get access back home. The days of Marvin Gaye and talking about what's going on. That was a great capture of a fictitious song to one of the guys coming back to. They used to call it the world. When they came from Vietnam, they called it coming back to the world. And so you have a guy who's gone for a year, and he's coming back asking, "Is the ball club we're independent? Do you think we have a chance?" Because he missed all the playoffs, he missed all that stuff. But there's a rhythm, and he appreciates that rhythm coming back in to figure out what's going on. One of the, I'm not a huge fan of
Hmm.
sometimes some of the language that a lot of our guys use because some of the words they use, I think I'd have been fighting all day long for. You
Yeah.
know, but but but
Well,
but
well,
but when you get past that, when you get past the the ex- the deleted things that they say, they're still talking about the world as they see it. They're
mhm.
talking about the things that appeal to them like for instance, I became a huge fan of Tupac too late
Mm,
because I started to hear and see his brilliance. I mean, he's spitting in today's rhythm and beat, and in a way that I could very easily see him being the thespian that Shakespeare was in his time, and he's
yeah,
using it in a media that works because remember Shakespeare's doing this on stage.
yes.
He's doing it on the airwaves, and that's kind of what happens. And so, by the way, this is anything that a soldier
Mhm.
can hold on to when he goes to these foreign places. He tries to bring it, and American music, and if you're black music, because it's a combination. It's him bringing part of America back, and by the way, embracing and sharing.
Love it. Um, how would they look at soldiers? What makes the likes of a Tupac relatable to a soldier of any color?
Yeah, good. If you listen to him, and one of my there's several, but um, Brenda had a baby, and when I heard that, because I knew Brenda, you know,
Okay.
and 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 the difference is that Brenda never, the Brendas that I knew had somebody like a family member that stepped in before it got too far. But there's others that I don't know that I've seen on the street, Brendas. And he's telling that story because that's a cry for help in a different way. See, I'm Catholic too. And so sometimes, you know, some of my Catholic brethren, they don't fully understand all the implications of a changing life of a young lady and all those struggles. They have flipped the switch and they go too far. But if you listen to what Tupac says, he's capturing a whole different side of life after conception and after delivery, or even the psychology of a woman when she hears the baby cry the first time, because they can embrace that piece, but then it's good.
Right.
That song captures what I believe is what ultimately has led me now to talk about teen pregnancy, and when a person decides to abort, I call it suicide,
Right.
because that's what I think it is.
And that's an issue that the military has faced, right?
Oh, we have to face that, because we have a back in the 50s we were floating around 20% married in the military. Today we're upwards of almost 50% married in the military. And so you got, and then you got females in a larger percentage, and many of them have women, so it's very, very different, very different.
Wow. And you know, I want to, prior to this, you had said something that I thought was really important. Most of us probably aren't even aware of. You know, walk us through the scope of, you know, you were a soldier during the Civil War, back in those days, in the Civil War times, the Korean War being a changing of the guards and how warfare was done, Vietnam War, and then, you know, that's bringing us to modern times. During the Civil War, during those years, they didn't have the Bob Hopes. And when you spoke on, you know, his name, and I think of, you know, the armed force networks, looking at bringing America to the troops.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to speak on that. Like, when did that get implemented, and what's the value of that, and the role that Black music has played in that groove?
Yeah. Right now there are now unfortunately during my tours, I'm an infantryman, so rarely was I able to hear some of those folks that came to visit or see us. Several African American athletes came over, and I would hear about them showing up at the Camp Libertyville at the base, but I wouldn't get a chance to generally see them because I'm usually with my guys and my units forward in much smaller locations, so they don't get the kind of security they need. But you had guys like Denzel Washington who actually tours bases, and he hates to get accolades for it, but the reality is that he's bringing America and bringing the face of benevolence to all these places. So people are getting a chance to see an African American face who's buying buildings for families to support wounded soldiers. And he would sometimes be part of other USO or United Services Organization shows like the Bob Hope to present. And you'd have others like the Mary Mary personally came to me because they wanted to be part of that as well. They wanted to bring both faith and they wanted to bring the music of a large part of our armed forces, because you know the military is roughly 18 to 20% at the enlisted grades African American, about 30% brown and black. But and ironically, which is a good thing, the upper levels of the non-commissioned officer corps is almost 48% African American or brown and black. Now the officer corps is a different story. We haven't joined in the kind of numbers that we need. But we have to present for our soldiers
Mm-hmm.
those things that they like. And all of our soldiers like the rhythm, the beat that is principally being provided by the music that is African American, and ironically, the other side of the same coin being country western, which is also full of rhythm, full of stories that everybody wants to relate to. They want to hear those things. You
Got it.
mentioned you mentioned James Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, James Brown's one of the first rappers. Folks don't they know his rhythm. They know that he used to talk about the beat. He talked to
Right.
Mr. Brown, Mr. Brown, hey, let me Brown. He said to Mr. Brown, say, play that beat. He wants to play that beat. And then you also mentioned George Clinton. Well, George Clinton is an original member of James Brown's band. And so he carries that same flavor, even though he took it to psychedelic.
Right.
He's carrying that forward. And by the way, as I was a cadet transitioning, I jammed on Flashlight, because
Right.
I
Okay.
like I liked that rhythm. And in college, I even worked concerts for Earth, Wind, and Fire and some of those folks to help pay bills. But
Right.
it was you hear that rhythm, and by the way, you carry it with you. And you're an athlete. That's culture. You bring that back with you. You bring that with you, that rhythm. And oh, by the way, we created cadences to try to update those
Right.
things, make them relevant.
And that's interesting because I remember in a prior conversation you talking about one of the original rappers that you give homage to would have been uh, Rudy Ray Moore, who we recently
Rudy Ray Moore, the original Dolomite, and
Dolomite.
oh yeah, we used to
Eddie
we used
Murphy
to
rebringing that character out. I thought that was interesting that you would talk about that having an impact.
yeah, those soldiers had Rudy Ray Moore albums. And Rudy Ray Moore, for those who don't know, they've seen Dolomite, they've heard it, and he used to
Yeah.
tell stories, because remember, these stories all came from being passed down because Rudy Ray Moore listened to folks on the street tell
Yeah.
these stories about the signifying monkey.
This would have been. It's kind of like it sounds like what you're saying is this is the original internet. This is how word and communication got out. Right.
Look, it's clearly the network for sure,
Right.
because it's passed, and people take those vinyl albums, and my stepdad had them, and he in his travel bags, and we'd find them and we'd sneak them and go play them, and then we said, well, that's where he got that from, because we're listening to other people in the street talking about signifying monkey. Folks should go look it up. And you hear him telling these stories, and of course they're a little vulgar. And I think in some ways that's probably the thing that I am most concerned about, is that we used to have compartmented parts of our lives and from our kids. Uh, that's now not necessarily there, and that's why I think I told you earlier. 50 Cent being one of the guys that he's got a watch on. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, what time it is. And it's no wonder he's a billionaire. It really isn't, because when he's on Oprah or Good Morning America, he's not the same. No, he's the same person, but he doesn't present the side of him that is 50 Cent. He becomes Curtis, because
Right.
he knows there's a whole different range of people who's watching that. It's
Right.
it's sort of like all of us. We have to know when to adjust. And that's, by the way, one of the greatest elements that a lot of our hip hop artists have taught some of the next generation.
Uh-huh.
That
So,
you go ahead, please.
what is your take with 50? You like it? You feel that he's a smart businessman? I noticed that there's a lot of soldiers that really kind of gravitate to his style of music. What do you think that and the U.S.
Yeah.
Army or Marine, why does that relate so well?
When soldiers used to call cadence, our cadence was really pretty raw, pretty vulgar, But when we used to run and go out to the woods, the words were a whole lot more vulgar, a whole lot more explicit. But when we came back into the cantonment areas and we got around families, in fact, we used to could even run around families. But then when you ran near them, your cadences changed. 50 Cent has kept what's raw, and he marks it so that, and soldiers, when they get to escape to themselves, they want to they listen to it, they hear it. Part of it gets them hyped, and it gets them into some cases the zone,
Right.
because the business that soldiers are in, it has a level of out of body experiences that they witness and are part of, and this allows them to make that escape. 50 when 50 plays his music, he's capturing that raw part of the street, that raw part of himself, and he does it in a way. But he also pulls, again, he knows what time it is. He also comes back in with extreme business acumen. When I was first stunned when I found out that he was doing water drinks. That
Right.
means he'd gone into the science, and he realized the commercialism of where we're headed with different waters. And of course, he also realizes the other more impactful piece of America is that what we see frames what we think. And so his movement into the media was a significant shift. And then his capture. And by the way, I became a huge Power fan to watch my frat brother Omari do his thing, but also listen to the lines he's taking. Pretty powerful.
Got it. So, your top 5 rappers, who is 50 one of your top 5 rappers? Where does he rank?
As rappers, well, you gotta understand. I kind of go back. I was a Run man, so Run's gonna always be in there. I really go back. Look, Curtis Blow is one of those guys, so you got to go back to there.
Okay.
Tupac is clearly in there. I wasn't a Biggie guy, although after watching the little baseball movie that came out, you can't help but listen to Biggie, but he's not my top 5. LL, and of course he's still spitting. LL is one of those guys. Let's see, who would I call from today's? I would say now, and but this is good. Rick Ross is probably snuck in there, but we're talking about Rick today. The Rick Ross that I knew was Freeway Rick Ross.
Oh wow! You knew Freeway Rick Ross? You actually knew?
I met Freeway. I met him. We've talked and had conversation, but in Kansas City. But when we first talked about that, it was my daughter and I. She was talking about. She said Rick Ross. She said, Dad, I said no, Rick Ross, Freeway Rick. She says no. She says, but the song you like a lot. I said, yeah. She said, Hustling. That's the Rick Ross I think you're talking about. So I said, yeah, that's him. That's good. But I said, yeah, but he, because I like the message in that one, because that's real.
Yeah, that's real. So you put Rick Ross in it. So we got Tupac, Rick Ross, 50 Cent,
LL, and I really gave you two. I really gave you 2 more of those up there. And I gave you
Run DMC.
I gave you Run. See, I gave Curtis. I gave you the old guy because they were talking like we talk.
Got you. And that's interesting. That kind of segues to, how do you see hip hop today? Since this is again Black Music Month, and when we look at the evolution of the rap game, spitting as we call it, from the days of Curtis Blow to, you name a Lil somebody. It once was Lil Wayne, now it's Lil Yachty to Lil B to you name it. But what is your thoughts of the Tekashi 6ix9ine with the rainbow color hair? Has he made your radar? Is he on your playlist, Tekashi?
So of all the names you listed just right now, the last three I haven't listened to yet. I have to get updated with my daughter when she brings me into it. But there are so many. See, this is the part of the game that I love.
Right.
There are so many young artists who are starting to emerge, and they're emerging in the business not just as presenters. They're doing what was almost unheard of years ago. They're owning themselves. They're
Mm.
doing they're doing the kinds of things that only few people like Chuck Berry did back in the day, which is own. If he made it, he owns it. You know,
Right.
but because guys like guys like Dre, Jay-Z, P. Diddy, they're the ones that opened that door. You know, and of course Curtis, they're the guys that opened the door that says, I'm going to be in the business to own the business. And those three of those last four have now moved into the most powerful people in America. They're joining the Michael Smiths and the Oprahs. You know, they've joined the only two athletes only one athlete right now that's in that group. Two athletes, I guess, is Mike Jordan and Tiger Woods in that group. But they're doing it out there, and of course, only one businessman, that's Michael Smith.
Right.
They're going into the business and they're changing the game. And so they're coming in spitting, but they're coming out making dollars and doing business work.
Right.
You know
So
what?
Takashi is the latest rapper. Very interesting story. To go to jail for snitching, right? And then the code of snitching, you've actually redefined that, where snitches get stitches, and now all of a sudden, using your platform, you get out of jail, you come out with a song. People thought you should have been off for snitching, and now he's redefining the rules of snitching. And with the even younger kids, it's business as usual. He's a success story. His song is on the charts. What do you think of characters like that who are kind of like, he's not even worried about a Jay-Z or Snoop. He's on another level.
Yeah. Our next segment will be talking to Big U. So
Right.
this will be a great one for us because
Yeah, that's
I,
culture.
here's what they're all doing. What they're all
Mhm.
are doing for us right now is, first of all, they're coming full circle. Most of the guys that got in the game, they got in the game to make the world better for themselves and for their families.
Mhm.
And so I would suspect, because I don't know him yet now, you just gave me a homework assignment. I'm gonna take it. Okay, he is starting to recognize that one, we don't if we don't get our street codes right, we'll be in the cycle of insanity. And insanity is what? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting
Right.
different results. So he's right now potentially giving us a chance to say, you know what? Let's keep it real, but at the same time, it's really all about not living in fear at some level, because he's telling his story. I would suspect, especially if he's being true to hip hop, he's telling his story from his side. You know, I mentioned Freeway Rick a while ago. Freeway Rick was in Kansas City, and he was telling the genre of his story. You know, an illiterate that makes billions goes to jail illiterate, does 20 years. After 20 years, he's read over 300 plus books and now published two or three.
Right.
And he tries to, he was, in fact, his Kansas City, he was trying to leave a message, and some fool inside the place missed his message. And he even had to tell him, man, you're missing it, because I'm telling you this. Had I been literate, I could have used the same tools in a wholly different way to be
Mm.
better.
Mm.
And I think Big U and I are going to have a chance to talk about that in a couple of days, because he told me two things already. One is I made bad choices. And I think we've got too many of our folks that are out there. My belief, there are at least 8 or 9 for every one Arnold Gordon-Bray that, given some of the same avenues, would be much more than I am, or
Mm.
much more than I became.
Let
So
me
this was
ask.
always the message.
Let me kind of segue. I want to get a little political here, and again
Sure.
for the culture. You know, to get to be a general in the military, what does it take? What is that rites of passage like, just to make it? We Some of us know what it takes to be a captain, a sergeant, captain, go up to those ranks of lieutenant. But what does it mean to be? What do you have to do to be a general, a one-star general, and go up the ladder from there?
You got to be a good sergeant or captain. That's the first thing. And and then you've got to be, at some point in time, demonstrate the ability to think the next 2 levels up. You've also got to accept the hard jobs when they come your way. And Robert Smith told me one time, he says, sometimes we have talent, but we're not prepared, nor do we want to accept the challenge. I accepted the challenge, and sometimes I floundered in accepting it, but I was committed to it. So if you're committed, you will do what you've got to do to be ready to perform. I think the other thing you have to do is you got to think of uh, things in perspectives that are bigger than you are. In other words, I fully well believe that Mike Johns and I have met each other. So now, based upon this interaction, I have some level of responsibility to you, to this platform that I'm on, and so you've got to have that kind of commitment as you go forward. You've got to do that, and so uh, that's the kind of the physical, spiritual, mental preparation. But the other thing you have to do is you've got to commit yourself to be a lifelong learner. And
Hmm.
because I was an infantryman, I also had to be physically capable. So you got to be a version of an athlete. And to use the words of John Wooden, you got to commit to trying to be competitively great. And then, you got to have some level of academic acumen, uh, as well as being just a lifelong. You got to have some capability, but you'll get those things. And then the last part is that piece that says you got to want to be in charge, and you have to accept it and know how to both motivate and be in charge when in charge. And some people say things like you got to be a good follower. I think that's bullcrap. I
Mm.
think you have to be a good supporter, and you do the kinds of things just like you run the show. You work with and for somebody else, but you're leading the show. This is yours. And so you have to take the reins and make it the best show that you can. My unit's got to be the best one I have. So you got to be a good scholar, athlete, leader at the end result, and make sure that you're the kind of person that can take charge when in charge.
Wow. And so the to get to be a one-star general, to make it, you can get to a five-star. What how long does that take? And
The
how many
the
are
the
there?
average time to make general will be somewhere between 25 years to 30. That's about time to make it. There are some guys who are outliers that will make it in 22, 23, 24 years. That's the Petraeuses of the world. But it's only 4 stars that we can have. You can make a 5th star. The president can make a 5th star. We haven't had one of those since World War II. They tried to make Colin Powell a 5-star, but Colin Powell, in his great leadership style of humility, he would not accept that role for myriad reasons. But you to make colonel, it's a uh, it is a process by which you are judged on your performance and your potential. To make general, it becomes a matter of people knowing you and who you know, because you're gonna get the same kind of a file put into a room. But then at the very end of the day, it's going to be people who absolutely know you and will start to then speak on your behalf to other generals, and then
Mhm.
pass that over to Congress, go to the president and then to Congress, for you to be appointed to Christian, promoted to the rank. And then after 3-star, you are only appointed to the position and given the ranks of 3-star and higher, 3 and 4-star. So to be a general, you're already at 1/12 of 1%, and so after that, it gets even infinitesimally more difficult.
And so there's a total of about how many generals would you say in the military?
In the military, there's about 1,000, but there's 2 million soldiers.
2 million
So
soldiers, 1,000 generals that make up the
1,000
U.S.
across all the services,
Right.
across all the services, and there are 6 services, and now I guess there's really, because you got the Air Force, you got the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and you have the Health and Human Services, and you also now have the Space Force.
The Space Force, yeah, I'm excited for that. Any thoughts in terms of the general then becomes kind of like CEOs and other, in the corporate world, right? There's typically one CEO to leave a company to take on the role of another, work over at Disney, but came from Coca-Cola. But a lot of it came off of the network of CEOs knowing you, having reference and what have you. Would you say it's kind of a similarity there?
There are some similarities, obviously, because people there's someone who makes the shuffling, and there's the chiefs of staffs of the different services who really work that part of the institutional services. And hats off to Charles Brown of the Air Force. He will be the first African American service chief. He's been nominated, but now it's got to be approved. But we've never had a person of color in top of any of the services, and Charles Brown will be the first to do that. So he'll get a chance to then be able to set the conditions for the Air Force as a platform. He's a former pilot, and he's gone through the ranks. And I knew him as the operations officers when I was in AFRICOM, when he was in the Central Command. But so in this African American Music Month, you can go ahead and add that to something that you're thinking about. So we're playing a different tune.
Right. I want to open it up for a little bit of questions, going back and forth. One, what are your thoughts about the Army changing the name of the bases, which originally were named after Confederate generals? What's your thought on that?
Well, there's 2 things. If you notice, most of the military bases are in the South.
Mm-hmm.
So
why is that? Why is that today?
At the end of the Civil War, when most of the bases were being established, part of that purpose was to make sure there were federal forces to kind of keep watch on the South over that time. And part of the placating of them was naming the bases after Confederate generals. Benning, Braxton Bragg, they were all Southern generals. The few bases that were named after Northern generals, Sheridan out of Chicago, they've almost all closed down. But most of the bases were named after folks from the South, so that it would be partially embraced, and also to quell the perception that there was going to be not just an occupation, but really and truly a move to go ahead and remove all leadership from the South after the war. So Fort Lee in Virginia, those kinds of things. My thoughts on it, I think there's got to be some heavy study associated with it. I think there's gonna have to be some levels of movement, because as the movements take place right now to go ahead and remove the vestiges of racism in America, as this gets studied, it will have all the impact and all the weight of removal of the Confederate flag from over the state of South Carolina. It's going to take someone not of color to go and recognize it and lead that charge. And from the perspective of one of color, while I've recognized it, I've seen it, and know what it's all about, it's something that principally I shut my mind to. But as the roar and the sense of oppression starts to raise, then when the troops start to feel it, They start to believe it, start to see it. You've got to do something at some point.
Nice. With the untimely death of George Floyd, what type of impact do you think that this will have on racism that also exists within the military? We've seen the NFL recently acknowledge certain things that it could take better precautions and create better behavior. What about the military as a result of what's happening across the country and with the untimely death of George Floyd?
I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ask this audience to pull up uh, General Charles Brown from the Air Force's comments, because he does a very good delivery. So does General Mark Milley of the Army. You can pull those names up. They have both given two very good captures. Mark Milley is a Caucasian, and Charles Brown is black. They've both given a very, very good explanation and talking about the services in a way that's personal and also gets us to moving forward. So as a soldier, the first thing's got to happen is it starts off with listening. And I'm saying that, I'm asserting thoughts, but I got to tell you, I would be listening first. I let the soldiers kind of tell me what they're thinking. And of course, you got to facilitate it a little bit so you can kind of cull it down, because everybody's given individual perceptions. And one of the challenges, or two of the challenges, I would say we got to think about very hard, very hard. Everybody that's with us in this fight ain't for us. And by that I mean this: there are people right now who are out there marching and sometimes breaking stuff, but they're not doing it because they're frustrated. They're doing it as part of a plan. They're doing it specifically so that the alt-right will have something to point towards. And they're marching in the movement, but a lot of those are covering their faces too. So you got to kind of watch that, because there's real frustration, and then there is planned frustration, and you can see it in some ways it's targeted. So we got to be very careful of that. But then there's others who are experiencing and expressing the frustration of years, and we got to be very careful of that.
Interesting point there. So, I mean, would you agree though that there's been a lot of racism within the military itself?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it is. I mean, racism by definition is systemic. One of my, and I'm gonna say a friend, he was so oblivious to the fact that he was expressing racism. He told me one time, he says, Arnold, he says, have you ever noticed that the African American lieutenant comes in, he is either very good or very poor? And I said, and I use a pretty clear example. I sprinkled some salt on a white table, and then I took some, and I asked him, how many grains of salt am I looking at? He said, I can't count. I literally grabbed a pinch of pepper, threw it in there. He could give me an approximate number. And I said, what you saw was on that white table, which would represent the system in the Army, that those white grains allow those other pieces to blend in and have anonymity while they developed. Our African American soldier comes in, especially in leadership positions, he is tried, weighed, and measured immediately. And so he doesn't get the benefit of developing. So those who are just average are being compared against those who are great. And so now they look less than. And conversely, the others who are probably just above average are being considered greater than.
So in the lights of General Powell, what would you say his path, what made him kind of this novelty that could have been a 5-star? And probably
he did several things, but he also, what people don't realize, and I asked you to read his book, he was actually the beneficiary of great talent, desire, and willingness to work hard. He comes out and he He was an average student coming out of college, but he competed and advanced his military learning as he went along. He was a top graduate coming out of the Command General Staff College, the white briefcase holder, and he was watched and observed as having a very good mind by George Bush the first. And then when he was being oppressed by some poor leadership out in the and I want to say it's at Colorado Springs, Bush watched what happened to him and brought him back to Washington, D.C., where his mind and his bigger than tactical talent that was being measured incorrectly was, and brought him back to D.C., and then prepped him to be his chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So he had several things going. There's three parts of mentorship. First part is that you get someone to help you in development and show you through the process. That's institutional. He did all those things well. He chose to do them right. He also, and in combat during the Vietnam War, he led well in America. And then he came back and led well as a brigade commander in the 101st Airborne Division Air Assault. But he was bigger than that. He thought about warfare from both the political perspective and where it meets the tactical. He did that very well. And so that's what made him rise to the top of the Command General Staff College, and also got him so that he was, and because he knew what soldiers smelled like. That's a rare talent to understand it and then embrace the personal idea that they belong to somebody. He was able to do that, and he would not try to pretend to be the warrior's warrior by putting soldiers, sailors, and Marines in harm's way. He was smarter than that. And so, and George Bush the first embraced that about him. And that's what made him special as he moves forward.
Wow. Another question has been thrown. Why, just trying to read this here. Why has the Army been the go-to branch of the military for Black men?
And first of all, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to first of all agree with this statement. I'll tell you why.
Go ahead.
The Army has always tried to be America's Army, even when some of the people inside of it didn't necessarily think that way. The Army has led the nation because the Army needs so much of America. It needs so much of America. It has to have, ever since the first guy that stood up for America, which was Crispus Attucks, took that first round in the Revolutionary War. The First Rhode Island Regiment also sealed off the northern part of the Narragansett Bay so that the Brits couldn't circle our forces in New York. The Army knew they needed more soldiers. When we were starting to lose ground and needed more infantrymen in World War II, the call went out to say we need infantrymen. And up until that time, the people of color couldn't be that. But when the call came out, the warrior in us, the warrior in African American, stepped forward. Sergeants took reduction in rank purposefully to fight with Patton. That kind of thing. And so the Army stepped forward. Now, have we done it right? Not necessarily, because in 1865, 1870, when West Point had a young man named Smith who was competing at West Point, number 13 in his class, because he was doing so well, they stopped him from graduating. And then later on, another person named Flipper, and then later Johnson became graduates. We're ahead of the other services because it's not till 1950 that the Naval Academy gets its first person of color. The Army started to see the value with first, in the Civil War, we saw it in the Revolutionary War, we saw it post-war with the 24th, 25th regiments and the 9th and 10th cavalries. We saw them perform out west. We saw the mind of Henry O. Flipper do great things out in the desert and actually bring civilization to the West. So the Army saw this. And we
Mhm.
saw it when we started to prepare. The rest of them realized, oh, you know what? Let's give it a shot. And then they've seen people rise to all those grades. But
Wow.
I agree with you. The Army led the way. Now, having said that, the Navy has taken this in the past 10 years. The Navy has actually really done an exceptional job in promoting the people of color as they move forward.
And where do the Marines and Air Force rank? I know Air Force is kind of like,
Well, Air Force, you know, I mentioned the Army. The Air Force, by the way, was the Army Air Corps. So, in truth, you could say that they have actually even outpaced the Army, but because they gave us Benjamin O. Davis, you know, the Army Air Corps, with them, with that advancement, the Red Tails, or the famed Tuskegee Airmen, taking it to technical expertise, and then, of course, the core of their service, which is those who fly. By letting that what was once called an experiment become something that also was inspired a nation. So, and then of course Benjamin O. Davis being our first 4-star, even though it was done after retirement, but they advanced that, and they've kind of taken the lead. So when I say Army, uh, we've got the tradition of it. The Air Force has extended that tradition as well. And of course, now it's with Charles Brown, they stepped in an entire first down ahead of over everybody.
two more questions just for time's sake. Next, this is an interesting one. Why do you think, in your opinion, why do so many white soldiers embrace hip hop culture?
Yeah. It's rhythm. It's America. It's the beat. It's the storylines. And as I said before, the hip hop culture is America. It really is. And sometimes it's a whole new world for them. But in some cases, it's a whole new familiar world, especially those who are country and they find a buddy who listens to it, and they're exposed to it. If you listen to country music for a while, you'll also find why Darius Rucker, you know, he transitions from being basically a folk singer to a country singer, but he wasn't brought up in that. But the stories in his head, the feelings in his head, he found had that same. So when the white guys are hearing the same thing, a lot of them are going that way. And by the way, you can the beat is undeniable. You know, when you're sitting there and you're hearing those beats, those pops, you know, the James Brown, the pop, you're hearing that beat, you're hearing that, and that moves your soul. You know, it's Ray Charles, you know, in his expression when he told somebody, said, "What is soul music?" He said, he basically looks at him like you're crazy. It's music. It's expression of who I am. So when those guys hear that, they're relating. They're starting to feel it.
You know, you say hip hop is America, and that kind of is a good segue to the last two questions. The irony that this music that was once rebellious, kind of rejected, now we're finding it's actually the music of choice in demand for troops when they're on tour. Uh, a lot of the military branches are starting to book hip hop acts to perform back to that Bob Hope thing, bring America to the troop. Why do you think that is? And maybe expand even on that rhythm that you were speaking on.
Yeah, in all fairness, it's the rhythm. It's the beat. Americans, you know, soul music before we even knew there was soul. Remember, for a long time, America enjoyed black music, if you will, but they camouflaged it. You know, Elvis Presley liked black music, listened to it, danced to it, but the face wasn't right for the rest of America. So when his face came along, it was okay because the music itself was there. Even Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons were confused for a while. People thought they were a black group, and but he was simply bringing an expression, and he was bringing it in a way that was rhythmic. It was spiritual. It was coming out, and they were hearing it. They were hearing those highs. They're hearing that beat, that rhythm, and so they were there. So it is America's music. Now the challenge we have is making sure that one, you know, we have to watch we have to be careful where we play all of it, how we play all of it. But
Hmm.
most of the musicians now have learned that when my beat's right, I can remove some of the street, but the beat remains, and I make it float. It's not as raw, but it's still giving me part of me, giving you part of me.
Right. Nice, nice. One more question here. I think one more question. What would be your message to the Black and Brown, Black and Latino, who wants to join the military like the days of old, to realize technology has played a role and that there's now a new set of skills that are required? It's not about you just thinking, I'm going to drop out of high school and join the military. Will robots take my job is actually a real thing. What is your take in terms of what tech has done in being a soldier of today?
Yeah. First of all, I'm going to give you two things. One is that right now the services don't even take but three out of every 10 high school graduates. Three
Hmm.
out of every 10 high school graduates. So if you don't get that diploma, don't even think about coming in. A GED is not even being considered good enough anymore. You've got to be an exceptional person with exceptional skills that would have dropped out of because we're being measured by that. And part of it's because one, there's still a physical requirement to be a soldier. The
Hmm.
physical requirement, while it focuses on flexibility, endurance, strength, diet, and sleep, the reality is that those things also feed the mind. You know, Gates now has become a runner in his late years because he realizes that by getting that blood pumping, he can also his stamina is increased. His brain, his ability for cognition is increased. And so uh, that matters. And then more importantly, at the end of the day, there's still a physicality to being a soldier. That there's still the requirement at the end of the day. When you kill a snake, most of us know that the snake doesn't die unless you cut its head off or you keep its head down. And to do that, you've got to have people that are willing to meet that snake face to face. But you do need the talent of the people who know how to use all the tools that's in their kit bag. And so there is, in fact, a science, technology, engineering, and math requirement. And at the very least, the process of how you think in science, technology, engineering, and math is being encouraged in every level, every facet of the military, regardless of the military occupational specialty you have. We're teaching some of those kinds of skills, and there is a preparation, there is an adjustment, there is a way we're advancing people to be able to compete. And while some people think that the robot is going to take the space, and we're doing some incredible things with artificial intelligence and augmented augmented reality,
Hmm.
we're also having to think a lot like the bees of nature. We're starting to create ways for human beings to go ahead and very quickly see information and share it and make something different to innovate, if you will.
Right, right,
So
right.
we're thinking that way.
Wow, that's heavy right there. And maybe just wrapping up on this tech question, um, you know, as we look at music, as we look at technology, uh, streaming services, like in the military now, you have so many new options that you never had before, and this is all powered by your phone, right? So from your phone, based on your carrier, you're now streaming Spotify on a battlefield. Is that really the reality of the world that we're in now, where you're actually using these platforms and you're streaming in real time in your situations?
Absolutely. There are tools that they're using. And of course, we live in a world where people can prevent, block, turn your information around. So we are always conscious of that. But at the same time, we're trying to keep access, and we talk about assured access and the ability to stream information to give you real time information. and be able to keep it accurate is very big. And the tools that are out there, some are your personal phones with some adjustments, and then some are military tools that look just like, operate just like your phones for those purposes. You know, if I may, I'm going to segue just a second, if I may. This is, you know, because you and I met through a gentleman named Kevin Clark.
Yeah, yeah,
That
absolutely.
from Dakar.
Very
One
big,
of the things,
also very big in
one,
the tech.
absolutely, one of the things that Dakar has been involved in is kind of the culmination of two parts of what we're doing right now. It's a getting people of color to recognize that they belong in this nation. You know, that red stripe behind my back is about blood, right?
Right.
That blood's got a lot of black in it. Okay, there's a lot of black. In fact, the first piece of black comes from that, and so we've got to be able to stream those stories. We've got to make sure that folks are using the pictures a thousand words mentality, and Dakar is trying to do that. But more importantly, it's trying to make sure that we're getting people of color to tell those stories so that history is no longer black and mostly white. It is now in color. So that when you see something is captured, the people that presented it added the story, the flavor, so that it looks like and is more representative of America. And by the way, in that process, the real goal of Dakar is to provide those opportunities for some of our young men and women to be able to be part of the American story in any way that they can. And he does a lot of work trying to work with the office of the Department of Equal Opportunity out of the Defense Department, which is one of my old supporters before I took my uniform off.
Nice, nice. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time coming on this show. We have you for a two-part series. The next one up will be, as we're calling it, a general and a gangster, as we feature both you and former LA Crip member Big U, and we're really going to be talking about culture and what us as Black men need to do and the responsibilities that we have kind of in policing ourselves and making this world better.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. I got a homework assignment that I'll be much more advanced on because that really fits a lot in culture. So thank you very much. I've enjoyed myself, and I look forward to talking with you and O'Shea again. So I'm gonna say 1-9, and you can give me a good bark.
There it is. All right. All right. Thank you so much for your time. Mike Johns, Texas South News, signing out.